Hello YouTube. In this video I'm going to be discussing leg training and everything that pertains to it. And therefore this means that there's actually a large portion of people who are not going to be interested because leg training is a dividing topic. Some people want big legs, some people don't. And I personally believe that it is valid, meaning that regardless of your goal, you get to build the body that you prefer. And having slimmer legs or having very small legs is an aesthetic choice at the end of the day. Therefore, I would like to extend a friendly hand to the people who are going to click off this video. I respect your choice and you get to build the body that you like. But for the rest of the population of this channel who are interested in building big legs, stick around because I'm going to discuss some of the best methods to apply, some of the pitfalls to avoid, and I'm going to discuss the mentality that surrounds leg training in general because it's a very important part of the culture. In reality, it's the reason why leg day memes are so prevalent. Is because training legs is either something that you love or that you hate. There's no in between. It's a very polarizing topic. So today, when I talk about legs, I'm going to mostly talk about the upper leg, meaning the quad, the hamstring, and as well with the glutes. I'm not going to be talking about the calves because I've already made videos about calves, and it just doesn't fit with the theme for one simple reason. A lot of leg training is going to involve either the upper leg or the lower leg, but you're going to be hard pressed to find a lift that trains both the calf and the quad, for example. And the few lifts that do tend to be bastardized versions, they tend to be hybrids of compound movements that are fairly atrocious. Meaning that all of these guys who do squats, where they do a knee raise at the end, or they do a calf raise at the end, it's blasphemy, it's terrible, it's dangerous on top of that because you're doing a heavy lift and then you're doing a balancing act at the end. It's something you want to avoid completely. You either train your quads, glutes and hamstrings, or you train the calves. Don't try to do everything at once. There is one exception, which is conditioning work and cardio, but these are exceptions. So that's the scope for the video today. So first off, let's talk about aesthetics. Some people say that having big legs looks terrible. Some people say it looks good. I am in the camp of the people who think that it looks amazing. I personally love big legs and therefore I am building big legs on myself because if I'm thinking about my optimal body, my dream body has massive legs. My dream body has legs so big that they become upsetting. Like you're wondering how is that even humanly possible? That's what I want. That's what I aspire to get. I understand that some people find that repulsive, that is okay. But I do believe that there is, however, certain points of the aesthetic discussion that are a little bit contentious, and I'm going to be getting to them right now because before we start actually getting into the topic of the leg training and the functional properties of the leg, etc., I want to talk about the elephant in the room. I want to talk about the meme of all memes. I want to talk about the cake. And by the cake, I mean the booty. I want to talk about glutes, right? I'm going to start this video by lengthily discussing glutes, the gluteus maximus, the biggest muscle group in the entire human body. It is insane to see the amount of discussion around that very muscle group. It is contentious in a sense. And it's contentious because you have people who believe that building a big ass is going to take away from your physique. And I personally highly disagree with that, meaning that to me, I don't really see how that could be the case because unless you're really thick, you won't have a visible booty from the front. That tends to be a female attribute. It's mostly due to insertions, but for the male body, the way you're shaped, your ass can't be seen from the front. So the only way your ass is visible is when you're turned to the side so that it actually pops, or when you're just turning your back to someone. And in both cases, the ass can't really take away from the physique because they're at the bottom of it all. So they are sort of on an island. They can't really take away from the upper back because they're separated from the upper back by the lower back, which tends to be slimmer. They can't take away from the arms for the same reason, and they can't take away from the legs because they're connected directly to them. So unless you have really small legs and a massive ass, it's not going to be a problem. And on top of that, if you think about aesthetics and bodybuilding, something that is highly researched and sought after in bodybuilding is roundness. Like it's that 3D effect. It's like those round muscle bellies. And what muscle is rounder than the ass? It's the reason why it's so attractive in reality. I think biologically it plays a role. It's the reason why both men and women are attracted towards it, is because it's nicely shaped. There's no other way around it. And therefore, you want to train your ass. It's just not something that is going to be hurting in the long run. And we're going to get into that, but I know that a lot of guys don't want to grow their butt because they think it's going to make them more feminine, which I don't really understand. Like, you're a male, you have the body fat distribution of a male, and you have the muscle insertions of a male. So if you grow your ass is going to look like the ass of a man. Why do you think you're going to turn into Kim Kardashian or something? You're going to have a perfectly manly butt. Because if you look at the difference between male and females, the shapes are completely and diametrically opposed. The female butt tends to be much rounder, the insertions tend to be higher in the hips and the hamstrings, and therefore it's that actual like round shape. That's the female butt. But the gluteus maximus on males tends to be much more of a square. It's the reason why when a guy actually has a developed butt and he flexes, it looks like a square, because it's not as round as a female. So you shouldn't really worry about that. On top of that, as I said, you won't store much fat here. And therefore, it's not like you're going to get that big booty that some girls get. It's extremely rare. There are some exceptions of guys who just do squats. They only do squats and they do nothing else. And therefore, they do end up with a disproportionately big ass. But that's not a problem for you. Most likely, your ass is too small. And you should strive towards having a bigger ass. You've heard it first, you want big glutes for performance and for aesthetics. Performance because it's the biggest muscle of the human body. And all lower body lifts involve the glutes to a great extent. And it's not just for the ability to move more weight, it's also for the ability to move weight the proper way. Because a lot of people who round back deadlift and who good morning their squat do so because they have a weak gluteus maximus. Keep in mind that the glutes is what keeps you erect. Make jokes if you will, when you're walking or when you're lifting. And therefore, if you have weak glutes, guess what? You're not going to be properly utilizing the power of your legs because your posture is going to go to shit the second the weight pushes on your spine. You want strong glutes. And you'll see that the way to get strong glutes is actually quite evident and easy. It's just to do compound movements for the lower body. I personally think that for males, at least, isolating the glute is a little bit of a meme, even for women, to be honest, because you can't really isolate the glute. The glute functions in unison with the quad and the hamstring and the musculature of the hips. So there are a few lifts, like the hip bridges and the glute thrust, I think the hip thrusts, that actually do work the glute to a high extent, but it's not like the only muscle that's working is the glute. Everything is working with an emphasis on the glute. But for males, unless you have a very weak point in that area, it's not needed. You can just do squats and deadlifts and you're going to get a fat ass eventually, I guarantee you that. If there is one thing that is developed in natural lifters who do compounds, it's the ass. You go to a powerlifting meet, a lot of these guys might not be the most aesthetic, but they got cake, all of them. And that's normal, they need it for performance. But for aesthetic, it's also quite nice. And then you can get into the discussion of, do women really like butts, etc., etc. First off, if you're a woman, the few that are on this channel, and you're into dudes, dudes love asses. So yes, you want to have a big ass, you want to have a nicely shaped ass. But for men, I've also noticed that women like it and dudes like it too. So regardless of which way you swing, it's going to be a net positive. The only problem is that if you only have an ass, that's an issue. A nice ass on a guy that's a stick is not super attractive. A nice ass on a guy that is actually buff and massive is good. So make with that what you will, but you want to grow those glutes. And then if we connect that to the topic of the leg, as I said, you also have people who say that big legs are feminine. And it's the same argument I'm going to use. Look at the shape of a female leg and look at the shape of a male leg when they're developed and muscular. They look completely different. A male leg tends to be much more square, again, and they tend to have much less body fat. So you're never going to have that roundness and that fluffiness of a female leg. Your leg is going to look massive, but it's going to look different. On top of that, you most likely have hair on top, so you have a hairy, big, meaty leg. How is that feminine? If you tell me that's feminine, I don't want to see the size and shapes of the women that you pick up at bars. Because if they look like this when they take off their jeans, you might want to rethink your priorities, bro, because you are bringing home trolls, all right? A female leg doesn't look like that at all. So don't worry about it. I know it was a big thing back in the days. It was like the kino body argument. Keep in mind that a lot of the guys who use those arguments are guys with small legs. And therefore, they will, of course, diss big legs. It's because they are dissing something they don't have. It's not to say that guys with small legs are necessarily envious, but those who tend to spin that type of arguments are. There's nothing feminine about a big leg. And if anything, if you're thinking about a very masculine man who works all day or who's very physically active, they're going to have big legs. Because the legs are the driver of powers of the body. So if you're going to want to be that alpha, you better have big legs. Of course, you don't want just to have big legs, because then you're not alpha, you just look ridiculous. But we'll talk about that later. That is what I call the frog physique, which is very prevalent in powerlifters and people who train for strength. They have massive legs and lower bodies and not much else. And the last part, before we get into the actual discussion, is going to be the myth that is this time propagated by bodybuilders who have spun this weird lie and this weird fabrication that states that training your legs is going to make your waist thicker, because if you train your legs through compounds, by default you brace and therefore the waist grows. I have found that to be a complete and utter mass of nonsense, meaning that it will make your core and your overall area of the abdomen more muscular, but it won't thicken it up. If anything, I'll grow the obliques quite a lot, but it won't make you look worse. I personally went back to look at my pictures when I was 17 before compounds, and I compare it to now. My large waist looked terrible back then, and it looks sort of good now. Why? Because I put muscle on it. So you don't want to fall for that. I know it's something that pro bodybuilders especially like to spill. Keep in mind, those guys get massive guts because of their GH intake and all of the insulin and nonsense they take. And therefore, it's so laughable that they would actually even utter those words, because their waist end up just blowing up to the point that no naturals would ever have to worry about that. So don't worry, do your compounds, your squats and deadlifts. It's not going to give you a massive gut. That's nonsense. Trust me. Now, if we're going to go back on the functional and aesthetic properties of the big legs, as I said, I like big legs. I think they look very masculine and they look good. I want to have a big body, and the legs are some of the bigger portions of the body that you can grow. Therefore, if you want a complete physique, you need to grow them. And we've seen that with time, the legs have become bigger and bigger and bigger. Some people are going to cite me the silver era in the 70s and the 80s when guys had slimmer legs. I personally am not a big fan of these looks at all. I prefer big legs. I prefer an X taper. Now, if you like the V taper more, that's your thing. But even with a V taper, you sort of want to develop your legs. But it's going to be a discussion between people who want big legs and people who want tree trunk legs. Because at the end of the day, what are big legs? That is subjective completely. Like, for some guys, 20 inches or 22 inches legs are going to be big. For me, that is small. For me, a big leg is 26, 27, and very big is going to be like 29, 30 inches. Those are my standards that are biased because I love tree trunk legs. Some guys are going to think that's already way too big and it's already ridiculous. That is fine. But understand that in terms of pure aesthetic, you cannot make a case for one or the other being better. You just can't. It's up to your own personal preference. Now, if we talk about functional properties, that's when we reach the territory of things that are not really up for debate. If you want the function of the leg to be propped up to its maximum capacity, you're going to have to put meat and muscle on the leg, because it's what is going to make it the most potent. After that, the amount of muscle and the utilization of the muscle is going to differ. But for the average lifter, for the average guy who's not an athlete and is just training for maybe looks or a little bit of strength, he's not certain yet, you want to develop the lower back, the glutes and the legs, because it creates a very strong protective brace against everything. The best way to prevent lower back injuries is to deadlift. The best way to prevent knee injuries is to squat. Why? You're replicating natural human patterns with weight, with resistance, and therefore you're getting stronger at them, and when you get back to doing them without weight, you are bulletproof. There is no lifter on earth that deadlifts 400 pounds that is going to hurt his back bending over and picking up something. That is not possible. Your back is so used to picking up heavy loads that you are perfectly able to move anything with one, good form, and two, a stellar thoracic extension and a perfect integrity of the spine. You're not gonna get snapped up. And on top of that, you are going to avoid the endless sea of overuse injuries and chronic pain that a lot of non-lifters suffer from. I know a ton of guys that are 25, 30, they already have back pains. Why? They have weak muscles. They have weak glutes, they have weak lower backs. And therefore, it means that their spine is constantly overused and they're in constant pain. The easy way to avoid that is to actually train the muscle. Don't fall for the deadlift or dangerous memes, they are not, as long as you have good technique. And we're talking about muscle, it's also going to help longevity. The people I know who are the most active and who are the most mobile in their old age are all people who have picked up a ton of stuff, who have done their knee flexions all throughout their life, and therefore have built a lot of muscle, beaucoup de capital musculaire, that they brought with them into their old age and that they keep. Because the muscle that you built is the muscle that you're going to have tomorrow. But the people who never built any muscle are the ones who are going to suffer when they're old and are going to be completely unable to move. You don't want to be that guy. So that's it for the overall appeal of the big leg. Now, if we're going to talk about athletic versus aesthetic, this is also a dividing topic because some people are going to point out the fact that very big legs might not be the most athletic. And I don't necessarily disagree. That is true. There are sports where having massive legs is going to be a hindrance more than a benefit. But that is just going to be up to your own preferences and your own orientation in a sense. For a bodybuilder, you're going to decide the size of your legs depending on the shape and physique you want to showcase. For an athlete, you're going to do the same, but this time based on what you need. So if you're an endurance runner, most likely you don't want very big legs. If you're a sprinter, you might want big legs, etc., etc. It is all dependent on your goals. If we're talking now about the size potential of the leg to me is one of the area of the body that is not necessarily the most underdeveloped, but the most mysterious in terms of limitations, because I do believe we have seen some pretty tremendous legs by naturals, a lot of which are natural powerlifters, but we haven't seen the full extent of how big and freaky the human leg can get without drugs, because it's like the upper back. The leg can take a decent amount of punishment, and it can also showcase an ability to put on size year after year after year into your old age. I believe that a natural lifter will see the prime of his legs and will see his legs being at their biggest and their most defined when he's in his mid-30s. And that is a long way from here based on my age and based on your age too, most likely. So you'll see that even if you have decently big legs now, you shouldn't set a ceiling for yourself. If you want them to get bigger, continue training and you'll see they'll get bigger. I've never seen, or at least I've never experienced, plateauing legs in terms of size. They grow like weeds. And so, this also means that if they grow like weeds, they are going to be one of the muscles of the body that is going to be the biggest, as I said, which is going to involve a certain amount of displeasures in everyday life because you're going to have to carry those legs around. I've said it in the past, there are muscles on my body that I don't really notice. Like for example, my chest, my upper back, they're big, but I don't really see them, right? They don't get in the way. The legs do get in the way. The legs are there, they're big, I have to find jeans that fit me. If you have big legs, you can relate. Shopping for jeans is going to be a bummer because every single jean is going to be way too loose around the waist, way too tight around the quads, and way too tight around the butt. Why? Because the average male has a bigger gut than they have a butt. And that, of course, is just a sign of the complete lack of muscle that the average citizen has, because in reality, if you're physically active, it should be the other way around. Your waist should be tight enough and that your butt and your legs are bigger in proportions, but that's not the world we live in, sadly, and therefore, I highly recommend you shop for elastic jeans, the ones that are stretchy. These are a godsend for people with very big legs. Then you have things like the chub rub or the legs rub together. I don't have that problem, some people do. And you are going to see also that in the day-to-day life, this is going to get people's attention more than you would think. To go back to the topic about like attractiveness, big legs tend to be the one thing that are the least represented in the average population, meaning that you have, of course, a lot of gym bros that train only the arms and the chest, etc. But when it comes to standing out, if you have very big legs, this is something that people are going to notice because it's not a muscle that is usually well developed, even in gym bros, because you have a lot of gym bros that just keep legs. So it's going to, make you a little bit unique and different. It doesn't make you better, but it might get you some compliments from people, more than you would think, more than your upper body even. It's an interesting thing. And you'll find also that it might also be because the idea that most people have of a bodybuilder, of someone who trains for looks, is the upper body. They only think about the upper body, like big arms, everything. So if you have the legs to complement that, you're going to be the full package. And I think that's a pretty attractive mindset to have. It's a pretty good thing to possess. But of course, you should also train and you should also develop your body based on your own goals and not what people think. Now, how do you get there? How do you get big legs? Well, the answer is simple. You're going to do squats and deadlifts. Translation, you're going to do hip hinges and knee flexions. And both of these can really be anything you want. They can really represent any lift that you enjoy and you gravitate towards. It doesn't have to be conventional deadlift and high bar squats. I've said it in the past. Make your own way and find your own preferences. Too many guys on this platform are way too dogmatic and they just say, oh, just squat and deadlift. No, you do hip hinges and knee flexions. This is a different semantic approach, but one that opens more possibilities. You can build big legs without ever deadlifting and without ever squatting, but you cannot build big legs without ever doing a knee flexion or a hip hinge. That's not possible. So get to it, get squatting or deadlifting, and get your lower body work in. That's how you level up your legs. There's really no way around that. Too many people try to find their way around that. They try to find like that secret method. There's no secret method because leg training is painful. And this is why so many people skip it, by the way. It's a natural inclination of the human mind to try to find reasoning and excuses for why we don't like certain things. Because it's tough to admit to ourselves the real reason behind it. And the real reason for why a lot of bros don't like leg day is because it hurts. A lot of that comes from their approach of the leg day because they train legs once a week, which is idiotic. The legs need to be trained with frequency. You want to train them, if you can, every 2 days, or at least once out of 2 training sessions. You certainly don't want to crush them once a week. That's how you make no progress. That's how you kill yourself with DOMs, and you end up just resenting that day. So you skip it altogether. Even though volume and intensity is really important for leg training, I have found that frequency is king. So you want to apply yourself. But you also don't want to fall into the trap of what I call the SS pitfall. The SS pitfall is the pitfall of any novice program or powerlifting-centric programs that have the liftee, or the novice, squat too often and deadlift too often. Because this is going to put too much of an emphasis on the lower body. I've said it in my program reviews. You want your leg days, your lower body days, to be shorter than your upper body days in terms of length. Why? Because you're going to naturally move more tonnage on these movements. So there's no reason to be just all out. And this is where you can actually apply minimalism. If you don't know what that is, check the description. But in this case, minimalism is great. I am pro minimalism when it comes to the lower body because I believe that it is perfectly optimal. You just pick a knee flexion and a hip hinge, you get good on them, you do them maybe once or twice a week, no overkill, and then you use variations based on these main movements. And just like that, you can grow massive legs. There's no need for gimmicks, there's no need for pumps for the legs. The legs can just grow without ever getting a pump. I have never in my entire life gotten a pump for my legs. Never. Ever. It's never happened. And yet I have 26.5 inches legs. I have a massive butt that's way too big, that maybe should be a little bit smaller, but for now it's fine. It is something that is foolproof, right? You can build those legs with very simple time-tested methods. You don't need to think outside the box. Of course, that doesn't mean, as I said, that you only do squats and deadlifts, but the methods applied can remain minimalistic in their nature. That is going to be perfectly fine. As long, of course, as you train for your goals. As I said, it's fine to not desire a big butt if you don't want a big butt. It just means that you're going to have to tailor your training towards that. So maybe reduce the frequency of the deadlift and the squat even a little more, so that you can actually step back and not get too much size there. Maybe you just want to maintain, and that's fine. If you do want to maintain, that's when you do legs once a week. But you do a tiny bit, not a lot of volume, just strength work to get your strength levels level again, and just maintain the size of your legs. Your butt is not going to magically explode during the night, right? You need to actually work it for it to become bigger. So that's a fear that you just can get out of your head right now. And when it comes to maintaining, I have found, and a lot of people can testify to that, that cardio does a very good job at that. Meaning that if you don't want your legs to grow any bigger, then just do cardio, right? You can still squat and deadlift maybe once every 15 days. The rest of the time you do your cardio. Because in reality, a lot of cardio still involves a level of knee flexion and hip hinges. So it trains the leg to an extent. And it trains the leg enough that they don't regress. Because the amount of work you have to put in to get the leg to a certain size doesn't correlate with the amount of work needed to maintain them to that same size. And therefore, cardio is going to represent less tonnage, less intensity, but it's still going to be meaningful enough that the legs don't shrink. And you can train functional properties of the legs that you're maybe very interested in, like jumping higher or being more endurant when you run, etc., etc. That is doable, but that has its limits. Because if you look at a graph and you look at the value of size and the value of function, a lot of the time these two don't correlate, meaning that if you only develop size for aesthetic properties and you want to maximize the size of the leg, you're going to have to sacrifice on function. The only way size can correlate perfectly with function is when function dictates the size. For example, you're a powerlifter, you want to get a bigger squat, the size of the leg will match the function that it has to actually fulfill. And therefore, it doesn't really matter the size of the leg. What matters is how much weight you move. And that's a different topic altogether. But for bodybuilding, it's not going to be the same. Now, does cardio actually kill leg gains? Some bros are going to ask that. They're going to think, okay, but what if it actually damages the legs? And as I just said, it's not going to be the case. It actually helps maintain. But it goes beyond that. What if, as I just said, you want to maximize the size of the leg while at the same time having very good cardio? Is that going to counterbalance it? Do you have to make a choice now? Because I already said that you're going to have to sacrifice function for size. But I believe that cardiovascular system health and endurance isn't a function of the leg. It's a function of the body. It's a function of the organs of the body. The legs are just a way to get there. And therefore, in this case, I believe that it is perfectly fine to do both. An example I'm going to use is, recently I've started biking because it's nice outside. And I bike 30 minutes to and from the gym, just as a warm-up. And I wondered to myself, okay, is it going to hurt my performance? Is it going to hurt my recovery? And the answer was no in both cases. It didn't hurt my performance, meaning that regardless of whether I biked or not, my squat strength didn't go down and my deadlift strength didn't go down. And the recovery aspect afterwards with the 30-minute bike back also wasn't affected because I could come back the next time, do legs and have no problems. What does it mean? It means that once you've gotten to the point where you're lifting super high amounts of weights in the gym, a tiny bit of biking or running or stepping or whatever won't even touch you. Because if you think about it in terms of tonnage, it doesn't have the ability to touch you. It doesn't damage the muscle fibers enough. Now, that doesn't mean that by squatting and deadlifting, you're going to build a strong endurance and you're going to become a marathon runner. No, it doesn't work like that. What it means, however, is that when you engage in some low-level intensity running, it's not going to have an impact on the muscle and its recovery at all or its performance. Okay? That is a very important distinction to make in your mind. Don't be afraid of that at all. But the other way around can be true. Your absolute performance in terms of raw endurance and running could be affected by your weightlifting. Because this time, instead of being very low intensity biking as compared to high intensity squatting, where the scale is just tilted towards squats and this can't even touch this, if you reverse the priorities and this becomes your priority, now this has too much weight. This is too potent. So you're going to have to lower the intensity there if you want the intensity here to go up. That is natural. Keep that in mind if that's your goal. If you're like an athlete or a fighter especially, your leg training is draining you. Be very careful with how you program it. You don't want it to overtake your other priorities because these priorities are your goal. Big legs are not your goal, all right? And when we're talking about cardiovascular endurance also, for the lower body, I have found that this is one of the main limitations that people have. When people say that leg day is tough, it's hard, a lot of them mean that. They mean that it's hard because when they squat, their breathing gets hard. When they deadlift, they can barely catch their breath, all of that. This is a sign of a very weak cardiovascular system. Sorry if that's your case, if that's you I just described, but this is a wake-up call. This is not normal. It's the equivalent of someone going up a flight of stairs and being completely winded. It's not okay. It means that your heart and your lungs are way too weak. I personally can do 8 reps of squat to absolute failure. I'm not even breathing hard afterwards. Right? I'm perfectly fine. I could go for a walk or run afterwards. This is the state of endurance you want to reach because you never want to be limited in your lower body endeavors by your cardiovascular system. That cannot be the case. Because if that's the case, you're never going to reach muscular failure. You're going to be stopped by your lungs first, and that's not okay. But you will find, however, that a very simple way to build that endurance, and I've made videos about that, is just to squat more and deadlift more, with more reps to build that cardiovascular system. And if you don't want to do that, you could just do high intensity cardio on the side, and it would carry over, I guarantee you. You'll find also that once cardiovascular endurance is built, it's built for life. It never really goes away, and it's very easy to maintain. Another big benefit of training your leg that is going to be just a byproduct is going to be mobility. A lot of people, noobs especially, ask about mobility. How do I get lower on the squat? How do I deadlift without rounding the lower back? And my answer to this is just practice the lift. But don't go like a complete barbarian and just put heavy weight and just pull or squat with bad form. No, lower the weight, maybe do it with a variation or an accessory, and focus on pristine form. I think I made a video about that in the past. You can find it in the injury prevention playlist. But when it comes to mobility, the best way to develop mobility is to be mobile. And by being mobile, I mean going through the range of motion into territories where you're not comfortable with resistance, with weight on your back or in your hands. Weight that is manageable so that it doesn't snap anything, that you can always control the weight and the movement, and it's going to force you to build that mobility in those areas when you're not super comfortable. That is something that is a key component of getting very good at lower body training. But keep in mind that this depends entirely on the way you're built. For example, I say you need to squat to depth. Depth differs from individuals to individuals. If you're not someone with short legs, for example, your depth is going to differ from a guy with very short legs because you're going to have to travel more, and at some point you're just going to be completely limited by your leg, by the length of the leg. And if that's the case, don't sweat it. There's no point in just forcing your body into weird positions it doesn't like. You're built the way you built. Go as low as you can and stick to that. And keep always an aspect of the training that stays in that range of motion. Partials are perfectly fine, but don't only do partials for legs. This is a recipe for disaster, imbalances, and injuries. You want to always have at least one full range of motion lift. It's fine to do it with a lower intensity, but you have to keep it in the program at all costs. So that also dispels the entire idea that you have to do stretches and roll and everything for mobility. This is not necessary at all. You can just actually do the lift, but you have to do the lift with the lower weight that you can actually handle properly with the proper technique and form. Now, Let's talk about isolation, and let's talk about an anti-minimalistic approach that I believe is counterintuitive and sort of destructive when it comes to leg training. That is going to be the leg extensions versus squats discussion. This is again big contentious topic, right? It's like the glutes and the legs. There are two camps. There's the camp of the people who believe that leg extensions are the devil and you never need to do them, and the lift should just be erased from the surface of the earth. And then you have people who think that leg extensions are perfectly fine and who also tend to gravitate towards the idea that squats are stupid. Of course, as always, both camps are in the wrong. There's an in-between. The thing with leg extensions is that in reality it's very simple to explain why they might be bad or why they might be good. They might be bad because the movement of the leg extension is a movement that is not replicated in your training. What does it mean? It doesn't mean that it's unnatural. The leg has the function of the extension, so it's not unnatural per se. It might be a little bit damaging for the knee tendon for certain individuals if you do it with improper form and too much load. But that's not really the issue here. The issue, however, in that case is that you never actually replicate that movement in your training ever. So the line of specificity is completely broken, meaning that you are now doing an isolation movement that is purely for the sake of building a certain part of the leg. That is fine, but keep in mind that it has no carryover whatsoever. I do believe that you can put a lot of weight on your leg extension. It's not going to make your squat much stronger at all because it's just a different movement pattern. And maybe you'll get some carryover because the muscle got bigger, but it's going to be very minimal. So if that's something you're okay with and you have good form on the leg extension, you don't have to not do them, but keep in mind that if I see in your program leg extensions and I don't see squats, I think that you're missing the point. A leg extension complements the squat, it cannot replace it. It's an isolation movement for the leg, which is such a big muscle group. You're wasting your time. This is when minimalism actually rules, because it destroys maximalism. Maximalism, which in this case is taking the place of minimalism. Let me explain this. Minimalism, in a sense, results into maximalism. I explained that in the video. Why? Because a lot of minimalists are going to just dump a bunch of lower body compound movements in a program and think it's optimal because it's the most bang for your buck, but the program becomes maximalist because now there's too much. So it's not minimalistic anymore. It's a perversion of minimalism. Same for maximalism. Maximalism looks at the leg and thinks, okay, I can isolate all of the muscles of the legs, all of the muscles, and it puts all of the movements of the legs in a program. It puts all of the muscle groups and the way to isolate them with machines. But by doing that, it's going through and trying to apply a maximalist approach to a program by making it minimalist. Because now you're picking every single body part and you're trying to have the perfect movement for them. There's no need. I firmly believe that trying to perfectly separate which muscle works at which point is a waste of time. It's going to make you go completely crazy. It's another perversion of the lift that has been brought over by pro bodybuilders because, of course, they have to invent some complication and some stupid methods to explain why their workouts are so terrible. For someone who is just a natural lifter, doing the lift that involves the muscle is going to take care of most of the heads, most of the portions. You don't have to worry about that. When you add a variation or an accessory, you can start worrying about the angles and the types, etc. But for the start, for the vast majority of people, a simple knee flexion takes care of the leg. You don't need leg extensions. It's the reason why whenever I see leg extensions in programs, I tend to slash them because they're just junk volume. Let me just check the time. Oh, right. So, if we're going to talk about the hamstring curl now, with the leg extension and the squats, the issue was specificity because the leg extension doesn't carry over and the squat does. So the squat allows you to then create a program with variations and accessories, and the leg extension just fails to do that. This is the problem with the lift and nothing else. For the hamstring curl now, it's completely different because a lot of people are going to compare hamstring curl, aka leg curl, and the deadlift. And this is a less prevalent mindset to have, but it's still interesting to compare those two because this is a different type altogether. But I still believe that the minimalistic approach functions. If you do a leg curl and no hip hinge or heavy deadlift, you're wasting your time because now instead of doing a lift that gives you a ton of tonnage, a ton of carryover to pretty much every single lower body lift, you're doing some tiny baby thing where there's no carryover whatsoever, you move almost no weight, and you justify that by saying that you can perfectly isolate the muscle. Okay, but you could have done the exact same thing, hit 15 other muscle groups, gotten much more bangs for your buck, and then at the end do hamstring curls. And that would actually complement the deadlift perfectly because it would focus on the actual stretching of the muscle, which prevents injury, heightens hypertrophy, and is a good lift to marry with the deadlift. But by itself, it's useless. It's like the leg extension. People have replaced compound movements with these movements, and now it defeats the very meaning and intention of the movement to start with. So that's the idea between those two. When you want to think about leg training, you want to think minimalistic. This is a perfectly fine approach to have. An issue, however, that might arise if you're too minimalistic, and you see that again with novice programs, is that an injury is always around the corner because a lot of people get snapped up on the squat and deadlift. And what snaps is not what you would think. A lot of people would think that the vastly occurring injury on the squat would be the knee injury, but that's not true. They ran statistics and polls and they found out that the lower back is what goes first. The lower back is the most prevalent injury in the squat and the deadlift. And that is because it gets overutilized because of poor technique. There's a video in the description that you can actually research. And because of overutilization via frequency, too much frequency. You want to be minimalist in your approach of leg training in both exercise selection and frequency. You want to do a few lifts and not do them too frequently. And that is going to keep you healthy and making gains forever. Because between a guy that is super intense on the squat in 1 year, during 1 year, and one that sticks to it for 5, the guy that sticks to it for 5 will be much bigger at the end of the day. He'll have accumulated much more tonnage, and that is definitely the approach to have when it comes to these lower body lifts and legs. It's a long endeavor. It's not a rush. You have all of the time in the wood, and you want to work on those legs to prevent injuries and be healthy in the long run. So if you're one of those guys who deadlifts and then the next day you have lower back pain and you smile like an idiot and you say, oh, it's dumb, it means I'm working well. No, you're not. It means that you don't know how to pull with your legs. You shouldn't be happy with that. It's a terrible thing and sign. It's not okay to be in pain after deadlifts or squats. These lifts are healthy, but you turn them into something unhealthy and you're going to pay the price eventually. And you'll never have big legs because of that. And to actually end this video, we're going to talk about something that I know almost nothing about, and therefore is going to be very quick, and that is going to be unilateral movements. I personally hate unilateral movements for one simple reason. I played football, and my coach would have us actually run laps around the field doing lunges. And I've done millions of lunges, and I have sworn to myself I would never do a lunge again. It's the reason why I'm a squat and deadlift boy. You will never see me do a lunge. I will never do anything unilateral. I hate it. I hate it. But it doesn't mean that it's bad. Those are perfectly good movements. They're excellent to deload the lower back, as I just said. They're excellent to quote-unquote isolate certain muscle groups without falling into the pitfall of the leg extension, for example, because they still involve the glute, lower back, and hamstring to a great extent. For the lunge, for example, you have a ton of variations you can apply, so the specificity aspect is still there. And all in all, it's a very good method for guys who don't like squats and deadlifts, who want athletic looking legs, which doesn't really mean anything because a sumo wrestler's leg is the size of my torso, it's still athletic, okay? Just because a leg is lean with feathers and the separation doesn't make it athletic. The ability of the leg to function in a sport makes it athletic, okay? It makes the distinction in your head. Looks have nothing to do with actual athleticism. But je m'égare, comme on dit en français. So as far as unilateral movements go, if you're one of those guys who want slimmer legs, that is something that you can actually espouse. You'll most likely really like those movements. It is true that in terms of pure function, they are more athletic for a lot of things because they have a staggered stance. It's not a fixed stance, even though squats and deadlifts are still very important to actually apply if you want to train for function and for athletic properties. But you will find that throwing in some type of different leg movement when you're a bit unbalanced can be an excellent thing. I know close to nothing about them, so I'm not going to give you recommendations about them. But in the comments, if we have some guys on the channel who are versed about it, share your experience, give advice to others, and help everyone develop the legs of their dream, because at the end of the day, the goal is what? To level up those legs. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.